The African savannah has always been a stage for survival, but once it became something far darker. For 7 days, silence gave way to screams, and the ground drank more blood than rain. Some called it madness. Others would remember it as legend. At the center stood 8 lions, rulers of a territory carved with tooth and claw. They were kings without fear, guardians of water and prey. Yet, on the horizon, shadows gathered, shadows that moved not as prey, but as an army. They were baboons, 150 strong. Their cries echoed like war drums across the plains, carried by the wind into the lion's domain. Few creatures had ever dared to confront lions head-on. Fewer still had survived. But what could drive prey to challenge predators? What force would unite so many into defiance? Was it hunger, desperation, or something darker? The savannah itself seemed to hold its breath, as though it knew what was about to unfold. On that first night, hyenas howled in the distance and vultures circled above, as if all life could sense the storm about to break. A storm of claws, teeth, and fury. This was not just another fight for survival. It was the opening chapter of a massacre, one that would last 7 relentless days. Legends are not born in peace, but in blood. And this was the blood that would stain the savannah forever. If you want to witness how the 7-day slaughter truly began, stay with us, subscribe, and join the journey into Africa's darkest war. Dawn broke with a pale light that stretched across the savannah, yet there was no peace in its glow. The lions stirred early, their ears twitching at the sounds carried by the wind. The cries of the baboons had not faded with the night. They had only grown louder, more frenzied, as if the darkness itself had emboldened them. For the 8 kings, this was no ordinary chorus of primates. It was a declaration, a warning that the balance of power was shifting. The coalition gathered on a rise overlooking the plains, their manes heavy with morning dew. Their golden eyes scanned the horizon where the dust of movement rose like smoke. What they saw was not the chaos of scattered animals, but a tide of unity, hundreds of shapes moving in rhythm, advancing together with an uncanny sense of purpose. For the first time, the lions felt the weight of numbers pressing against their authority. As the baboons drew closer, their screeches cut the air like knives. They brandished their fangs, beating the ground with their hands, chests heaving with fury. Some carried stones, others wielded broken branches like crude weapons. It was not elegance or strategy, but it was defiance in its rawest form. Against them, the lions stood silent, tails flicking, their muscles taut. They had always been predators, hunters of scattered prey, but this was different. This was a wall of resistance bearing down upon them. The first collision erupted with shocking violence. A young male lion, driven by instinct, charged forward with a roar that shook the air. His paw struck a baboon, snapping its body against the earth with brutal ease, but the victory was fleeting. The swarm closed around him, claws and teeth flashing, their shrieks drowning out his growl. He fought with savage power, tossing bodies aside, but for every baboon that fell, 3 more hurled themselves upon him. The coalition erupted into action, charging down the slope to meet the flood. Dust rose in choking clouds as the 2 forces crashed together. Lions slashed through the ranks with terrifying strength, their jaws crushing bone, but the baboons fought with reckless unity. They leapt onto the lions' backs, clawing at their faces, tearing at their manes, screaming with a madness that seemed to grow stronger with every drop of blood spilled. For hours, the battle raged beneath the rising sun. The cries of the baboons echoed across the land, mingling with the thunder of roars. Blood stained the grass. Bodies lay broken in the dust, and the air reeked of violence. It was no longer predator against prey. It was something larger, a struggle that defied the natural order, a war that would mark the savannah forever. The second day began with heat pressing down over the plains. The early sun had already baked the earth, and the air shimmered with rising waves of dust. Both forces bore the marks of the first clash. Among the baboons, bodies lay scattered where the lion's strength had torn through them, while on the lion's side, fresh cuts scored their flanks and patches of mane were torn away. Yet neither group retreated. The conflict was no longer a sudden eruption. It had become a prolonged struggle for dominance. The baboons gathered in the safety of rocky outcrops, their calls echoing through the landscape in unbroken waves. They were restless, moving as one, climbing, leaping, regrouping. The massing noise unsettled the savannah. Herds of antelope moved away from the commotion, and vultures traced wider circles overhead, drawn by the scent of blood. The lions rested in the shade of sparse trees, their chests rising and falling heavily, conserving energy but never lowering their guard. Their eyes followed every movement across the open ground. As the day advanced, the baboons launched another advance. They surged in waves, a wall of bodies pressing forward with relentless persistence. Their numbers gave them boldness. Some pelted the lions with stones loosened from the cliffs, others rushed in directly, teeth bared, screeching until the sound drowned out the cries of smaller birds. The strategy was simple but overwhelming. Force the lions into exhaustion by refusing them rest. The lions responded with explosive bursts of violence. When the baboons came too close, the males charged, their roars reverberating across the plain. Their swipes and bites scattered the front line, leaving crushed bodies behind. Lionesses joined the defense, circling the flanks, quick and precise in their strikes. But for every retreating group of baboons, another wave surged forward, drawn by the security of sheer numbers. The fight carried into the heat of midday. Dust rose in choking clouds, clinging to fur and skin, turning the battlefield into a haze of movement and sound. The lions fought in short bursts, conserving strength, while the baboons tested them with reckless persistence. The ground became littered with bloodied grass, and the savannah's silence was broken only by the chaos of struggle. By afternoon, the lions had pushed the primates back once more, but the victory came at a cost. Wounds bled freely from their hides, and fatigue hung heavy over the coalition. The baboons, though scattered, regrouped again on the rocks, their voices carrying into the distance. They had lost numbers, but their presence had not diminished. Instead, their call seemed louder, as if each scream dared the lions to prepare for another night of relentless attack. The third day began with tension layered over exhaustion. The lions had spent the night restless, pacing, their ears flicking at every cry that cut through the darkness. By dawn, their flanks bore dried streaks of blood, their bodies carrying the weight of 2 consecutive battles. Yet as the sun rose, they did not retreat from their ground. To yield territory was to surrender access to water, shade, and prey, resources no pride could abandon. The baboons emerged again from the escarpments, their silhouettes dark against the rising sun. Their ranks had thinned, but their cohesion had not faltered. They moved with determination, gathering in the open with a density that made the ground appear alive. The air filled once more with their harsh cries, and as the chorus swelled, other creatures of the savannah drifted away from the noise. Herds of zebra moved to distant grazing grounds, while giraffes turned their long necks and disappeared towards safer plains. Unlike the chaotic charges of the first 2 days, the baboons approached with sharper coordination. Groups advanced in bursts, spreading out wide to probe the lions from multiple angles. Some remained high in the trees, hurling branches and stones, while others closed in on the ground, their long canines glinting as they bared their teeth. It was persistence sharpened into pressure, a test designed to stretch the lions thin. The coalition reacted with calculated bursts of force. The largest males rushed forward to disrupt the main advance, scattering baboons with roars and sweeping strikes of their paws. Lionesses flanked the movements, targeting stragglers, their agility allowing them to dart in and out before the primates could swarm them. Cubs were kept deep in the brush, hidden under the watch of one vigilant female, far from the chaos that unfolded. The clash reached its peak near midday. One of the younger male lions became overextended, charging too far into the mass. Baboons clung to his back and shoulders, biting and clawing, their collective weight forcing him to stagger. His roars carried across the plains, and the coalition responded swiftly. Two older males lunged into the throng, scattering bodies with violent force, freeing their ally before the swarm could overwhelm him. The moment underscored a critical truth. Even lions could be undone by numbers if separated. By afternoon, the battle shifted. The baboons' momentum faltered, their formations breaking under repeated charges. Several of their boldest fighters lay lifeless in the dust, and their calls began to lose cohesion. The lions pressed forward as the primates retreated toward the rocks once more. The turning point was not absolute victory, but it was a shift in balance. For the first time, the baboons showed hesitation, their advance slowing, their calls less unified. As the day closed, the savannah carried a different silence. The lions stood bloodied yet unyielding, their unity tested but intact. The baboons clung to the cliffs, restless but cautious, their voices quieter as dusk settled. The war was far from over, but the momentum had begun to bend. The fourth day began under a heavy sky. Clouds gathered above the plains, casting long shadows across the grassland, and the air carried a dampness that hinted at rain. For the lions, the previous day's skirmish had marked a shift in the conflict. They had forced the baboons into retreat, but the cost was visible. Fresh wounds lined their bodies, some deep enough to slow their movements. The coalition lay stretched beneath the thorn trees, muscles twitching in uneasy rest, their ears turning constantly toward the cliffs where the primates gathered. The baboons, though diminished, had not dispersed. From the ridges came their constant calls, a chorus that refused to fade. They moved along the rocks in restless patrols, juveniles darting between elders, females keeping close to the troop's core, and males baring their teeth as they surveyed the open ground below. Their numbers had thinned, but they compensated with persistence, sending small raiding groups into the grassland throughout the day. These groups tested the lions, approaching in sudden bursts before pulling back into the safety of the rocks. As dusk approached, the tension thickened. The lions stirred, aware that darkness offered their advantage. Their vision cut through the night, and their movements became sharper, quieter. Yet the baboons did not wait passively. With the fading of light, their calls grew louder, echoing across the savannah in a relentless chorus that unsettled every creature within earshot. The noise itself became a weapon, denying the lions the stillness they relied upon before the hunt. When darkness fully claimed the land, the struggle resumed. From the cliffs, waves of baboons descended, moving in chaotic bursts that disoriented even the sharp eyes of the lions. Some struck from the trees, leaping down onto the open ground, while others rushed directly at the pride, forcing the lions to scatter and regroup. The coalition fought back with explosive charges, their roars shattering the night, but each clash drained more energy from their already weary bodies. The night stretched into a grueling test. The lions struck with precision when isolated targets presented themselves, dragging bodies into the grass. But the cost of defending from multiple directions weighed heavily. For the baboons, the chaos itself became survival. They attacked, retreated, and attacked again, never allowing silence to settle. The savannah was alive with movement, a battlefield where sight and sound merged into confusion. By the time the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the toll was clear. The lions stood, their bodies streaked with fresh blood, their breathing labored, their paws heavy with fatigue. Around them, the ground was torn and trampled, scattered with bodies of the fallen. Yet the cliffs still held a mass of baboons, their silhouettes gathering once more to scream into the morning air. The fourth day had not broken either side. Instead, it stretched the conflict into endurance, a war measured not in single victories, but in the relentless grinding of strength against persistence. The fifth day arrived with the savannah bearing deep scars from the conflict. Grass lay flattened in wide circles, blood had dried into dark stains across the soil, and vultures gathered in greater numbers above the battlefield. The carcasses of baboons lay scattered where the lion's strikes had landed true, while bones from smaller prey, abandoned hunts, and broken branches marked the passage of chaos. Both sides remained present, but the tempo had shifted. The war had settled into attrition. The lions, though still imposing, showed signs of strain. Their ribs pressed against their hides as days without regular hunting began to erode their strength. Wounds that had once bled freely now crusted into hardened scabs. But infection and stiffness slowed movements. Even the dominant males rose reluctantly, stretching with care before taking their positions. Lionesses prowled cautiously, their ears twitching at every movement in the grass, conserving energy for moments when defense was unavoidable. The baboons, too, bore the weight of exhaustion. Their initial aggression had been thinned by casualties, and the loss of experienced males left gaps in their formations. Yet the troop did not scatter. They remained close to the cliffs and acacia groves, feeding quickly and keeping their young within the safety of the group. Their strategy had shifted from reckless charges to harassment. Smaller groups darted forward to test the lions, throwing stones, screaming, and retreating before the predators could launch a decisive counterattack. By midday, the encounters became a cycle. A rush of baboons closed the distance, their cries piercing the still air. The lions responded with sudden bursts of force, charging just far enough to break the line before pulling back into shade. Dust clouds rose and settled, only to rise again an hour later as the cycle repeated. Each clash left more bodies on the ground, but none delivered a final outcome. The toll spread beyond the battlefield. Herds of antelope avoided the area entirely, shifting grazing routes to distant valleys. Scavengers filled the void. Hyenas prowled the edges at night, snatching scraps when opportunity allowed, while marabou storks stood motionless during the day, waiting for their turn at the remains. The presence of so many opportunists only heightened the tension, as both lions and baboons defended not only against each other, but also against the encroachment of other predators. As the sun dipped low, fatigue weighed visibly on both sides. The lions lay sprawled, conserving strength, their eyes half closed yet alert to every sound. The baboons settled into clusters on the rocks, their cries fewer but still persistent, like a reminder that the war had not ended. The fifth day did not bring decisive victory. It deepened the grind, eroding stamina, testing which side could endure the relentless strain of survival longer. The sixth day rose over a battlefield heavy with silence. What had begun as chaotic surges of noise and violence had now become something slower, heavier, and more dangerous. The lions no longer carried themselves with the full power of their first charges. Their movements were precise but strained, every step weighed down by fatigue and the ache of unhealed wounds. They had endured longer than most predators could, but endurance itself carried a cost. The baboons were equally diminished. Their troop had shrunk from overwhelming force to a battered remnant, yet their persistence remained unbroken. The cliffs still held them, their calls still rose at intervals, though the shrieks had lost some of their unity. Older males led fewer raids now, pushing the lions only when opportunity appeared. The reckless surges of the early days were gone, replaced by calculated harassment. Survival had forced both sides into narrower margins, where every move mattered. As midday burned across the plains, a collapse in balance finally came. A young lioness, weakened by hunger and slowed by an untreated gash, faltered during a sudden rush. Baboons closed in quickly, swarming in numbers too great for her to escape alone. Her cries carried across the savannah, summoning the coalition, but by the time the males arrived, the damage had been done. She staggered free, torn and bleeding, but her ability to fight had been stripped away. The loss was not death, but it was crippling. The coalition circled her, licking her wounds, watching as she lay motionless beneath the shade. The pride had been weakened not by direct defeat, but by attrition tearing into its foundation. For the lions, each member mattered. To lose even one in strength tilted the balance against them. The baboons, however, paid for the moment with heavy blood. The counterattack was brutal, scattering bodies across the rocks. Several of their boldest fighters fell under the jaws of the males, dragged into the dust with violent precision. When the sun lowered again, both sides had suffered, and neither had gained the certainty of victory. By dusk, the savannah stood still. The cries of the baboons echoed from the cliffs, but they were fewer, broken by long silences. The lions lay close together, their breathing shallow, their eyes fixed on the last glimmer of light. 6 days of struggle had ground them into shadows of their former power, yet both remained locked in the war, bound to see it through. And so the 6th day ended not with triumph, but with the slow realization that survival would demand one final test. The decisive 7th day was coming. Will the lions stand as rulers of the savannah, or will the swarm of 150 break them at last? Stay with us as we uncover the climax of the 7-day slaughter. Subscribe now so you don't miss the conclusion. The 7th day dawned under a pale sky, the light muted by dust that hung over the plains. The battlefield carried the smell of blood and decay, a silent testimony to the week-long struggle. The lions stirred slowly, their bodies gaunt, their manes heavy with dirt and dried blood. They had endured 6 days of relentless pressure, and now only the final confrontation remained. Every movement carried purpose. There would be no retreat, no hesitation. From the cliffs, the baboons gathered once more, fewer in number yet driven by persistence that defied exhaustion. Their calls broke the silence, filling the morning with a rhythm of defiance. Mothers clutched their young close, while the males prepared for one last surge. The troop no longer had overwhelming force, but desperation gave them a unity sharper than ever before. For both sides, the 7th day was no longer about territory alone. It was about survival itself. The clash began with an eruption of noise. Baboons poured from the rocks, a flood of bodies sweeping across the open ground. The lions answered with a roar that rolled across the savannah, a sound that carried fury and defiance. Dust rose high as the two forces collided, each strike echoing like thunder. Lions lunged with claws and jaws, dragging primates into the earth, while baboons swarmed in numbers, leaping onto backs, biting, clawing, and forcing the predators to fight for every step. Hours passed in waves of violence. The lions fought as a unit, the coalition working in bursts of coordination, males breaking charges, lionesses flanking, all holding the core together. Yet each rush drained more of their strength. Their bodies bled, their breathing grew ragged, but still they stood. The baboons in turn faltered with every charge, leaving bodies scattered in the dust. Their calls grew thinner, their movements slower, the edges of their assault fraying. By midday, the tide shifted. The largest male lion surged forward, scattering primates with a roar that silenced the plain. The coalition pressed the advantage, driving the baboons back toward the rocks. One by one, the raiders broke, scrambling for safety, their cries turning from defiance to retreat. The troop that had once been 150 strong collapsed into fragments, clinging to the cliffs with nothing left to give. When the final cries faded, the savannah fell silent. The lions stood bloodied and battered, their pride diminished but unbroken. Around them lay the remains of a war unlike any the plains had seen, a battle of persistence, numbers, and endurance that stretched across 7 relentless days. Victory had not come without cost, but in the end, the lions had held their ground. For generations to come, the story would remain, whispered as a tale of the week when baboons and lions waged war across the savannah. It was not just a battle, but a testament to survival, to the raw edge of nature where strength and persistence collide. This was the 7-day slaughter. If you followed this war to its final stand, join us for the next great conflict of the savannah. Subscribe now, because the wild still holds battles untold.